up with my name on you, but so you can, I believe you can change your name, but we know who you are.
You know who I am. Everyone knows
Yes.
who I am. Hi,
Hello,
everyone.
Brooke. Hello,
Hey, Brooke.
Matthew. Now, why am I not seeing it, people? With a view. Oh, I see. Gallery.
Yep. There should be a gallery option to have a big look at everyone.
Yep. Hello, Dina. Oh, she's got a microphone on mute. Ron's here. Right. Any more to come, Carly?
Not so far, but we do have like sort of double this amount registered, but a lot of people register and then watch the recording. So if you want to get started, if everyone's okay with that, give us a thumbs up.
Yeah.
Oh, good. Perfect.
Okay. So welcome everyone to this Working Well Together workshop. I'd like to acknowledge the countries in which we virtually meet. I'm on the lands of the Ghana people, and I pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and also wish to acknowledge the disproportionate nature of the effect of stroke on the First Nations people. Also acknowledge the individual, my own and collective expertise of those with a living or lived experience of disability. We recognise their vital contribution at all levels and value the courage of those who share this unique perspective to achieve better outcomes for all. And first up is Letitia, living on what is important for stroke survivors and where do they see the gaps in the research.
You'll have to unmute, Letitia.
Oops, so sorry. Thank you, Matthew. So for those who aren't familiar with me, my name is Letitia Living. I have lived experience of stroke. I have been partnering as a participant in research projects for a number of years and recently on the investigator team as a consumer researcher. So to assist with this discovering the needs and priority areas for lived experience, I asked our stroke community 2 questions. What is important to survivors of stroke and where do they feel the gaps are? So we wanted a broad response. I asked these questions through various spaces within our network, through social media platforms, Instagram, Facebook groups, and via email. So from the responses to the question, what is important to stroke survivors, some themes emerged, which are independence, physical outcomes, such as being able to walk again, rebuilding physical strength, being able to communicate efficiently or effectively, with friends, family, clinicians, therapists, and in social settings, feeling valued within the community and with family, or finding purpose if unable to return to work, having a supportive network and social support, and access to therapy, a comprehensive discharge care plan. That wasn't their words, they were my words, but some of those things were not feeling like they're on their own after leaving hospital or not knowing what support is available when reintegrating back into community. Carer training before leaving hospital was a big one that came up with support people, where they wanted to feel confident and comfortable in their carer role prior to returning to home. Navigating the post-stroke life. So how to balance family, work, children, and the household, in particularly when you have fatigue. So the second question, where do they feel the gaps are in stroke research? And again, some common themes emerged from the responses. They were mental health and the emotional aspects of life after stroke, vascular issues in pregnancy, so the risk of stroke while being pregnant, or subsequent strokes if you've already had a stroke prior to falling pregnant. People living with aphasia to meaningfully contribute to stroke research, alternative therapies. So some examples were CBD oil, acupuncture, massage, diet, nutrition, Botox, and mindfulness. And just a quick disclaimer, these suggestions were all raised to complement traditional medicine, not replace them. So people were saying they'd like to see a holistic approach to rebuilding physical, mental, emotional, and cognitive function after stroke. Understanding fatigue, that was quite common. Apraxia and dysarthria. Technology was also common, so people wanting to see more research around robotics and VR, and cognitive training. So when we put those questions out to the community, we did have a few additional comments and feedback. That is that stroke care needs to be equitable across the lifespan. So some of our older population were saying it's great that there's a lot of support for young stroke. However, those who are older are also greatly impacted by stroke and would like more support for rehabilitation so that they can return home rather than going to a nursing home. That there are gaps between hospital discharge and being able to access community rehab if you're not eligible for NDIS or cannot privately fund your own therapy. And then there were gaps in rural and remote communities to accessing services. Mental health care needs to start as soon as possible. Women wanting support specifically for women. So things around intimacy, menstruation, on blood thinners, pregnancy, parenting. And the comments were that they would prefer female therapists to deliver information that is specific to the female experience. Information on specific types of stroke. So CVST, AVM, brainstem, and thalamic were coming up. And then in particular, like the pain, thalamic pain, when you're having when you've had a thalamic stroke. And people don't want to fight for long-term therapy. That then brought up another question for another day, which is how long should therapy be accessible given that stroke is lifelong? So we want to hear from you if you are a survivor of stroke or a caregiver and support person for someone who has had a stroke. We would love to continue this discussion on our social pages. Please like, follow, and join our discussion on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. So I'm going to hand back to Matthew now. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you, Letitia. Can we try and keep questions to the end, although I know memory issues and writing are a challenge when you've had a stroke. So if there's anyone in that category, if you have a question now, feel free to ask it. Okay, otherwise we might on. Just go back to my slides. So next we have Thomas Beltrami with sharing experiences of co-design. Take it away, Thomas.
Thank you very much, Matthew. Okay, good morning or good afternoon, depending on which state you are attending from. My name is Thomas Beltrami. I'm a biomedical engineer, rehabilitation engineer, and a PhD candidate looking at virtual reality stroke rehabilitation for the upper limb. So, Letitia, very glad that you mentioned that technology and access to rehab has been identified as a gap, because this is something that I'm trying to address. And while I've discovered it by reading the literature, it's really reaffirming to hear that stroke survivors are identifying that as a real need as well. So as a bit of an overview, this is the inside of my application. So I'm looking at mirror therapy, which for those that aren't familiar is where you have a mirror box where you would be looking at the mirror and seeing a reflection of your unaffected side. And then through the process of neuroplasticity and some of the mirror neurons in the brain, it actually can interpret your unaffected side as an improvement on your affected side. And it works similar to the way that a positive affirmation works. When you say something and you believe it's true, and then it can become true. Same mechanism, but from a visual perspective instead. So I've got my VR headset here, and what you can see on the screen is what you would see if you had put it on your head. So you can see a green hand, where that would be either the right or the left, and then you would be reflecting across. And the way that this works from a music perspective is your hand would be raised higher, and you would then play a higher note. So it was all about providing access to stroke survivors and other people with disabilities that don't necessarily have the fine motor skills required to play an instrument, and then being able to gain some rehabilitation benefit from it as well. But what I identified, and my supervisors very early on, is that I had the technical capabilities to program a system like this, but I didn't have the lived experience or the clinical knowledge to fully deliver this in its entirety. So I've gone down a co-design pathway where once I had a working prototype, which is what you saw on the screen, I then went out and asked a number of stroke survivors, how can I improve this? What have I missed? What's working? What doesn't work? And I did the same for clinicians and researchers and other engineers in the field. So I really tried to be broad and holistic in my approach to gathering feedback. And that was across age, it was across technology usage, as well as music experience. So I wanted to figure out whether someone who has or hasn't played music can enjoy it, as well as someone who's never put on a VR headset before. Do people get motion sick? All of these questions were what I was trying to address. So what you can see on the screen in the figure are the 2 VR headsets that I've been working with, as well as a number of activity monitors. So I've got a few of them with me today as well. And these I was also testing because I'd like to find out if people were willing to wear more than one on each arm, if so, for how long, and that would help quantify whether there was improvement in my research as well. So the part I want to talk about mostly is the co-design here. And as a first-time researcher working with people with disability, I will admit it was quite confronting. I wasn't sure how to ask questions appropriately all the time. This was my first time working with people with severe upper limb impairment in some cases, and there were points when they would have the VR headset on and I had to ask about movement in particular ways, if they were comfortable with me moving their arm, and I discovered that everyone was really receptive to asking questions, but I was cautious about going too far because I didn't know what was appropriate. I didn't want to make anyone feel uncomfortable. So that was something that I learned to navigate, and the response I got back were really, really positive. Now, I have a pretty strong indication that everybody in this call is already a believer that co-design is very important. But I just want to share the first learning that I went through that made it crystal clear to me that there's no way that I'd be able to do this project without it. And that was actually in using the VR controllers. So I've got a controller here in front of me, and you can see there are 2 buttons on it. So the trigger button here, and then the button you press with your middle finger. When I was designing the application, I'd intended it to be held with both hands. And when you press a button, you then activate a musical note. What I didn't realize I had done is if you press either button on either side, you deactivate the ability to play another note. And what this meant is when I put a controller in the hands of someone with tone, a muscular tone, the only way they could hold it was by pressing both buttons. And what that meant is in seconds, they had deactivated the application, meaning that if I had gone to send this out into a pilot trial without having tested it first, it would have been useless the moment I walked out of the door. And that was a really, really important learning for me to realize that the way that I use technology as an able-bodied person is very different to the way that a stroke survivor would use it in different variances of upper limb impairment. So that was the big one. And there have been so many other anecdotes that I've learned along the way as well. The other thing that I wanted to be really clear about was getting perspectives across all end users, and that includes the therapist as well as the partners of the stroke survivors, and obviously the stroke survivors themselves. So simple things like putting on a headset. So one of the things I discovered and was able to test was you can actually put this headset on one-handed. which you couldn't do with the original one, and that was an important discovery. And then simple things like how much space is required, do people need assistance when getting seated, and how is the application used? So those were all questions that I was able to get answered by the range of people that I was working with, and then particularly on the movement side of things as well. So from a music perspective and from an engineering perspective, I knew what I wanted from being able to create different ranges of motion. So I was particularly looking at up and down, but the feedback I got from the therapist and the stroke survivors was forwards and backwards, and being able to reach and grasp was actually what was more required. So I've now redirected the way that I was designing the application because of that feedback. The other major point that I was able to learn is why, beyond the movements, the rehabilitation is important. So I can maximize the Fugl-Meyer for upper limb assessment, which is my primary measure, and figure out how that can translate from a statistically significant research perspective. But for getting back to life for a stroke survivor, that means nothing. What does mean something is, can they independently make a sandwich? Can they pick up a glass or turn a key? And those were the movements that I can then now focus on. So having that context helps me see the end goal, and then I can now see that in the way that I'm developing. So as I said, I don't think I need to justify co-design any further, but just wanted to share that from my early perspectives, given my first research project, I'm now a huge advocate for co-design, and really wish that it becomes more normal. And having just returned from the Asia Pacific Stroke Conference, I can confidently say that the tide is changing, and we are seeing more uptake of lived experience in research, which is fantastic. I just wanted to end on this slide here to show the improvements that I was able to make after having a few sessions. So down the bottom, I've got the professionals, and up the top, I've got the stroke survivors. And you can see at different points, and I've had different clusters in time of when people were participating, but immediately there have been direct influences that stroke survivors and the professionals have given me. And then I was able to bring those changes into the next version, so that the next person that tried it was able to learn a little bit more and get a better experience. So right now, I'm almost at the end. I have about 2 spots left in my co-design for stroke survivors to participate. And then early next year, I'll be launching a pilot trial to see if this work can actually improve upper limb function. So if you are in Adelaide and would like to be involved in this work, please reach out to me via email, or Carly will be able to share my details after this. I'd love to work with you, hear your experiences and get your insights. And you're also very welcome to scan the QR code, which has a number of my research outputs to date. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Thomas. Any questions for Thomas quickly? Yeah, Nina.
Do you want me to wait till we're finished? Because I've written my stuff down.
If possible, yeah.
Yep. Okay.
Okay. I might just share my slides. And now we have Kim and Emma about including people with aphasia and difficulties faced by carers.
Hi, everybody. I'm Kim, and this is Emma. Hello. I'd like to talk about working in including people with aphasia in research. So next slide, please. What is aphasia? Well, aphasia is a communication disability which mainly occurs from brain damage, most commonly due to a stroke, and it can make it difficult to speak, understand, read, write, and use numbers. And it makes it very difficult to take part in daily activities. It does not affect intelligence, and it is a hidden disability. Thanks. Why should we include people with aphasia in stroke research? Well, aphasia represents 30% of stroke survivors, and they're mostly excluded because of their communication difficulties. And has a high potential to affect the validity of the stroke research. And it's also an ethical and a human right issue. Thanks. Some reasons why people have been excluded, well, lack of experience and the skill in communicating with a person with aphasia, and a misconception that a person with aphasia cannot meaningfully participate in research, and a belief that a person with aphasia won't be able to understand, follow instructions or engage. You want to do the next one?
All right, so strategies to help include people with aphasia in research. So they'll conduct an in-depth interview beforehand to establish a connection.
And this is a really, really important point. We've been involved in co-design, and the person who has done it has taken time to meet with us over Zoom and learn about Emma's types of communication.
Yeah. And take the time to learn how the person with aphasia prefers to communicate. So that's an example.
And include a carer in
Yes.
the interview. And last one.
Include
no.
Take the time to learn what supports are needed to improve the person with aphasia's experience.
So what sort of language can you use to help in your research? Well, use short, simple language, everyday words, one idea per sentence, and numbers. Express them as figures. That makes it easier. And also next, sans serif fonts like Verdana.
Yep.
Headings that are linked to your content, black text, increased white spaces, the key information highlighted in bold. And you want to do the last?
Yeah, bullet points and text boxes if possible, and visualize answers in words and pictures.
Really relevant pictures and words. Now, Emma and I were luckily able to be involved in a co-design of a aphasia research template, and it is now available through the Aphasia Research Library. So these next couple of slides are courtesy of Dr. Sarah Wallace from the University of Queensland. So this has been co-designed with people living with aphasia and researchers, and it makes it easier for people with aphasia to access and understand research, and it helps the researchers to share their research in a way that is relevant and accessible to people with aphasia. So it's got the features that I just spoke about, customized format. You can adjust the font size and the spacing. You can include text to speech, change the speech rate. There's a dictionary function, there's a summary content, and you can choose the sections that you'd like to view. And for researchers, you need to just sign up with email or ORCID. You can add your view or a summary. There are tips for writing summaries. There's an automatic Flesch-Kincaid rating, which is the standard type of rating for text. That's the most useful. Upload images so that have images there, and there's a linking to your main article, and it's a permanent link to an electronic aphasia friendly summary that can be shared. So I'm sharing this information with you and also people who are living with aphasia. You can include a link to the Aphasia Research Library on your website, and the research team is very happy to present if you need to, and asking you to please link it in your journal articles and social media posts. And yes, Brian, I will send you a link later, a copy of these slides. And if you need to find more information, Carly, on the next slide, you can contact Associate Professor Sarah Wallace at the University of Queensland. And I'm not going to talk too much about the difficulties faced for carers at the moment, but if there is someone who'd like to ask questions about that, all I would like to comment on the carer's role is that people realise that it is a really big life change, and it can affect not just the person with aphasia, but those living with them and communicating with them and trying to find a way to do that. And one of the points that was on Letitia's presentation was that it's important for people to recognise that stroke is not a quick fix, and it's an ongoing thing, and carers are always facing ongoing problems as well. So thank you for listening to our presentation.
Thank you, Kim, and especially thank you, Emma. I think you spoke better than I did at the start with the well, should have come to the slide, or I got a bit sold up. But perhaps we can save any questions for the end, unless someone has some issues and wait.
Just
No?
got a very quick comment, if you don't
Yep.
mind, Matthew, and coming off
Sure.
the back of the stroke conference, the wonderful Brenda Booth, who I'm sure many of you know, really highlighted that as researchers, a lot of us miss the mark in terms of timely sharing of works, of when we involve stroke survivors or people with lived experience in our research. It can be months and sometimes over a year before we get back and actually share the outcomes of that. So I think what you've just shared, Kim, is a really good way for us as researchers to share our work in an accessible format. And it was a bit of a kick up the backside for myself to actually get on that. So thank you very much.
And I can just add those points about making it accessible for people with aphasia apply generally to improving communication in general. So that was really good to see. And now we have Dina about stepping into the research space.
Thank you so much, Matthew. I'm going to try and share my screen. Hopefully that's come up okay for everyone. So for those of you that I haven't met, firstly, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak today. I really appreciate sharing my limited but hopefully valuable experience with you. So yeah, I've been asked to talk about how I suppose, started in the co-design journey. And for me, a little bit different to Thomas, I've come from a very clinical background. So I'm a physiotherapist by training and loved being a physiotherapist and still identify as a physiotherapist. It was a big decision for me to step away from the clinical world. And I guess in some ways, co-design has allowed me to do that because I feel like I'm still very close to the clinical setting, and I can have a really close connection with people with lived experience of stroke. So as it says on the slide as well, I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Newcastle, and I also have a position at Western Health in a research capacity. So this is just my little transition slide. So that's me on the left with a lovely patient who I looked after some years ago, who has consented to me sharing this image. And on the right-hand side, you can see hopefully some familiar faces to most of you in the room. And this is me, I suppose, transitioning into a clinician researcher space. So I guess just to share, to try and not cover what has already been covered by speakers before me, some of my learnings so far, and these are both quotes from people with lived experience of stroke who I've been fortunate enough to work with on my big PhD project, which I'll share about in a minute. So the first quote in the blue is collaborative relationships between survivors of stroke and researchers are essential to achieve fit for purpose outcomes. I probably didn't really understand what that meant when I first embarked on the journey of co-design, but I guess now sort of having had that experience, I understand that had I not had the privilege of working with people with lived experience on my project, a bit like Thomas, the work that we did and the outcomes that we would have had would have been drastically different. So very much appreciate that the iterative nature, so the, chunks of involvement from the very, very early stage and throughout the project have really shaped how the project has evolved. So it wasn't, it was really important for us to have that involvement very early in the piece, because if we had involved people with lived experience towards the end, again, the outcome would have been very, very different. So one of the key takeaways is, if you are going to embark on co-design, to do that justice, it's really important to have that involvement really, really early. Like when you're sort of ideating, when you're thinking about what you want to do, that's when it's appropriate to start having those conversations. The other thing that I really didn't understand in the yellow blurb is the quality of the answers really depend on the quality of the questions. When I first started drafting survey questions and interview guides, they were very much physio clinician kind of speak. And that's all well and good for physios and other clinicians if that's your target audience. But if the target audience is people with lived experience, unless those surveys and interview guides are designed not even with the help of people with lived experience, but almost by people with lived experience, because I have very little understanding of how to ask the questions. I know what I want to find out, but as far as asking the questions appropriately, that was a really steep learning curve, a really good but very steep learning curve for me. So moving on, just some of the things that I've already touched on. And Kim, you made me very happy because I bolded some of my things in my slides without seeing your slides. So I feel like I've learnt some things already, which is great. So in the words of Julie, who was one of the quotes you saw beforehand, authentic relationships is really, really important. And it's not just a tokenistic say hello in the hallway kind of conversation. Like, it really takes time, as Kim says. So making sure that you take the time, or for me, what was required is to take the time to build that rapport with all the people with lived experience that I worked on my project. It really is time well spent, because what you get in return is so much better and richer if you've developed that relationship with the person you're working with. Key to success is listening and being willing to compromise. Not always easy. I think generally researchers, and I'll speak for myself, not on behalf of others, but generally researchers have a pretty clear idea of sort of what the problem is, where they want to go, how they want to get there, and kind of what the outcome might look like. But that's not in the spirit of true co-design. And I think for me, it was really important to learn to listen and be willing to adapt. So that's something that evolved over the course of the project. Probably wasn't a straightforward thing to start with. And some adaptation to my style was important as well. So wordiness, in lots of words in an email were not well received. And so I learnt to write very differently when I communicated with people with lived experience of stroke, and specifically, as Kim and Emma spoke about, people with aphasia. It's extra important to make sure that when you communicate with people living with aphasia, that the communication style meets their needs. And I guess that last point is similar to what both Kim and Emma spoke about as well. Accessibility needs vary, and we can't assume that somebody's accessibility will be the same as someone else's. So the most important thing is to ask. You're not expected to guess or know, but I think it should be expected that you ask if you are working with people with lived experience of stroke. So moving on to my wonderful team of lived experience champions, the dream team, one of whom is on the call, Brian. Hopefully you like that mugshot of yourself. This was the wonderful consumer advisory group who worked on the iRebound After Stroke project, which hopefully some of you, if not all of you, are familiar with. It's a website that we created together to help survivors of stroke living in the community be more active and to eat a better or more well-balanced diet. We don't want to call it diet, we call it a healthy way of eating, right, Carly? So moving on, what we did, because we invested so much time in the co-design of the website, we really felt it was our responsibility to write all of that down and try and create a bit of a roadmap, not to preach to other people of how to do it, but to just really share all the steps that we took to get to where we wanted to get to with this website, and how many pit stops we had to take in order to make sure that we got it right. So thankfully, this paper has recently been accepted for publication in the Journal of Medical and Internet Research. There's a link to the preprint there if you're interested, or I'm happy to send that to you after this session. But that paper outlines the steps that we took, and it's a pretty long paper, sorry if you're going to read it, but it does highlight how complex and how much attention is required to, I suppose, do it justice, or do the process justice. I'm more than happy to chat to anyone about this if you are interested. And that's all from me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dina. Now, if anyone has any questions, there's time for a bit of open discussion. Just remember to unmute yourself. Brian.
Good morning. Look, I just think every presentation's been brilliant for a start, and particularly the aphasia one, as I tend to write a lot, that will come in very handy for me. So that's why I asked for a copy of the presentation. 2 points I'd like to make. Thomas, you spoke about the information, the disbursement of the intelligence from the research to the participants in the research. It's mandatory, I think, in any research project that you develop a communication strategy as part of the process, so that you have something laid down in a solid form, so you can get it becomes almost second nature when there's a highlight or a milestone. You can just flow it out, because there's nothing more disheartening to a group of participants in a research project that you don't go back and tell them what came out of it. Yeah. Now, number 2 is, what was number 2? Oh, yes. Lived experience is mandatory. I'm passionate about that, almost as passionate about the Wallabies winning the Bledisloe, but not quite. The second part of that is lived expertise. You must remember, in all your projects that you co-design with stroke survivors, they have lived expertise. And sometimes that lived expertise can become a real benefit to your project. I'm on another project with the George Institute, and on that we have an IT expert, we have a business strategist who's got a small business, we have a master in educational learning. So it's all we're all survivors of and carers of a particular malaise, but it's also the expertise that adds to the richness of the project. So always remember and take that into account. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. I just want the conference I was just at, the presentations which had involved co-design at some point were, I think, richer and more relevant, both to us with those of us with lived experience as well as the wider community, and they're also more rigorous. So, Nina, you had a question.
I do. And I'd just like to say thank you for the presentations. They're all wonderful. I've written things down about all of them. But I'm first actually going to start off with Kim and Emma. Emma's gone, has she, Kim? Okay, well, I was just going to ask her a question to say, did she feel included by being, like, how did it make her feel being a part of that?
Oh, I'm sure she's actually working from home. Yes. I think she did enjoy it.
Okay. Oh, good. And
she's quite happy to co-present. Yeah.
Yeah, great. Yeah, everything you brought up, so valid. And I just want to say across the board, everyone spoke. There seemed to be more recognition of duty of care about bringing us people who are so easily triggered, and that can easily block any kind of continued working, because it's like, oh, that person's too distraught. Well, if the researcher might think about how they've just triggered the person, then maybe there's a little bit more awareness of how to, get the most value. So on that, I'll move to your presentation. I loved the way you spoke. It was so well paced. And mirror therapy, I just thought back to my own experience and how I was one of those people who would melt down in overwhelm and nobody knew what to do with me. So I just wanted to ask, is there more awareness about that sort of reaction these days? And are there, I guess, strategies put in place to go, oh, we pushed that person too much. However, they're still valuable. We still want them in there. Is there?
Not really. And thank you, Nita. So when you say overwhelm, are you referring to being overwhelmed by the sensation of seeing like the reflection of your unaffected side on your affected side and the disconnect between what your brain is telling you?
I was in overwhelm about everything. It's hard
Yep.
to like differentiate. Yeah, it was big. It was overwhelm about absolutely everything. But that didn't take away from my intelligence as to why I'd been triggered. And my want to be still included. But it seemed that as soon as there was some sort of emotional reaction, it's like, no, we're out of here. So that duty of care, I think, is really important. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's really disheartening to hear, particularly if that was coming from clinicians or medical professionals. But I think what should happen is that you're given time to process. And in my intervention specifically, I'm looking at chronic stroke survivors. So this is really trying to identify and address the gap of anyone who has gone through their immediate acute rehabilitation and is now living at home, potentially unable to access NDIS funding or anything that can give them long-term support. So the idea is you'd essentially buy or get funding to get a VR headset, and then you've got it for life. Was the vision that I wanted, and then it's meant to integrate into your day rather than the therapist booking time. So you can just turn it on for 10 minutes or an hour and integrate it into your daily life. So that's the vision. And I honestly do believe that VR and other assistive technologies can get us there. It's just about the clinicians, the engineers, and the lived experience survivors working together to see that through.
Yeah. Thank you. And Dina, I just love the broadness of your discussion. And I'll be quiet now so somebody else can have their say. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Letitia?
Thanks, Matthew. Dina, I have a quick question for you. I loved how you were talking about building rapport and how necessary that is for a good research project. So I'm wondering, how did you develop rapport? Like, what strategies did you use so that you knew that you were getting through those blocks to develop a deep and meaningful connection with your lived experience participants?
Great question, Letitia. Brooke, I hope you don't mind. I'm going to throw you under the bus here. Not so much throw you under the bus, but more talk about how we developed our rapport before you featured as the star of our videos. So we created exercise videos as part of the website. And to do that, there was quite a lengthy, I suppose, preparation phase in terms of not turning up to someone's home with the film crew saying, hey, we're here to do the filming. So what we did is Brooke and I first spoke on the phone and exchanged some emails, just sort of the general introduction and, this is what we're trying to do. Would you like to have a further conversation about it? We then had, I can't remember whether it was a phone or a Zoom conversation. This was all during COVID, so there was a few restrictions on us that we don't have in place at the moment. But I think probably the key, and Brooke, you might want to contribute here as well. The key for me was Brooke was happy for me to come to her home, no film crew, just me, to talk about what she can do, what she would like to do, what works for her, to try and really design, when we did get to the point of filming, that there was no surprises. So there was no surprises about Brooke's involvement on the day. So we went through everything that we would be doing on the day of filming without any pressure. And I hope Brooke felt like what we had come up with was good for her. But also what I did is I made a summary afterwards of what we had discussed, what we said would be done on the day. And I sent that to Brooke via email for her to review and provide feedback on whether or not that was suitable and whether I understood correctly what we had agreed on. So then when it came to the day of filming, there was absolutely no surprises. I'm not sure if you want to say anything here, Brooke.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think it was important for us to have fun. So I think if you can find a common ground in any research, whether it be exercise or peer support or robotics or anything at all, just having a bit of fun along the way. It doesn't always need to be serious.
Good on you, Brooke. And I think that's a really good point, actually, because obviously Brooke is a colourful character, and if you've seen the website, you'll understand that she's colourful in more ways than one. But there are different people, and they need different approaches. So for Brooke, it was important to have fun, and fun we had. I had other participants who wanted a very methodical approach and you know, to go through sort of, you know, we said we're going to do this and this. We needed to go through it in that order, and that was what they needed for it to work for them. So it was really trying to understand each individual participant and trying to cater to their needs as part of the process. So in the end, hopefully, everybody involved felt like their needs were met during the process. Thanks, Brookie.
We might take Brian and then Letitia and then Carly.
Okay, I'll be very quick because Dina mentioned my name. I was a member of the Consumer Advisory Group, and iRebound, I think, is one of the finest examples of co-design that I've ever seen. I think the people who were on there, Brooke was fantastic. Dina, I amplify what you said. The preparation was evident with every piece of talent that was on there, and it really is. There's Carly sitting up there. She was on the team, and of course, I've got to give credit to the Honourable Professor Coralie English, who really did lay the vision for iRebound. And I'm a disciple. I think I've written about 30 blogs on iRebound, and it's got to keep going. And I think if you haven't seen it, just go on, just type in rebound, and it'll come up. And it is a classic example. And a lot of it is due to someone called Dina. She put her heart and soul into it, and it really is an example. It's a pity it wasn't allowed at the there wasn't a presentation conference, Carly. She didn't hear me.
I did hear you. Yeah, bold of you to assume that I have any say in that whatsoever.
I'm finished now. I'll sit down.
I'm just about to put the link in the chat too, if anyone wants to have a look at the.
Oh, excellent.
Letitia, so I'm just going to jump in ahead to finish on Brian's point. And something that I want to shout out Dina did really, really well is added the names of everybody who contributed to the work in the formal journal article. And this is very much going against the grain. So traditionally, every person that was listed needed to be tied to an academic institution, and that can be really complicated. But now there's a trend towards including everyone who contributes, lived experience, research, or a combination of both. So it was really nice to see that was there, Dina.
Thanks, Thomas.
Cool. I'm just going to ask Kim a quick question. Kim, I'm putting you on the spot. What do you need as a carer/communication partner to participate meaningfully in research?
I need also to be involved in the getting to know the researcher as well as part of that interview process, and trying to fully understand exactly what they're attempting to do. If I was as a carer, it's important for us to be included along the whole process, and so that we have that relationship with the researcher as well, and then you feel comfortable, you feel like you can ask them anything. And it may take, you know, it just depends. And we've had some researchers we've worked with together and we've instantly hit it off, and we've managed to get that rapport, and also to feel comfortable that they're going to take into account Emma's communication difficulties, and that they're going to really fully address that. And she will tell them if it's not going to suit her or not. And so we sort of work together. So thanks, Letitia.
I was just going to add to that, if that's okay, Kim, not obviously as a carer of someone who is living with stroke, but in reference to how we try to accommodate for potential participants with aphasia in our research. We had, and hats off again to Professor Coralie English, who built a really strong team. We had a really experienced speech pathologist on our team. And when it came to involving people with lived experience of aphasia in our workshops, that workshop was facilitated by the experienced speech pathologist to try and really give a safe space to people with aphasia to express themselves in ways that I couldn't facilitate. So we co-facilitated together just to try and hopefully bring people with lived experience of aphasia into this research as well. Yep.
That's a good point. And hopefully the Aphasia Research Library website will help for at least people to get started if they're nervous about doing it. And you know, just remember, a person who has aphasia is just having trouble getting their words out. They've still got their intelligence. However they learn to communicate is as up to them, you know, whatever works for them. And also just remember that that person may suffer from fatigue. So give them a bit of time and be aware that, you know, an hour-long session is probably going to be too much. Take breaks, or, you know, keep it condensed to shorter sessions, because I know from living with Emma that when she's tired, she'll start to yawn. You can see her forehead get red. It's hard work getting that brain firing.
Yep, it can be. Carly, and then Letitia, I think.
Thank you, Matthew. We've all had really lovely and good experiences with co-design, but I think we've all probably come across some challenges, and I think sometimes it can be the measure of a good piece of research or a researcher as to how they address those challenges. And I wonder if someone would like to share an experience that they've had where maybe it didn't go so well, and what the person did to sort of flip the coin and make it go better. Do I need to pick someone? Letitia's got a hand up. Maybe she can answer that one for me.
Oh, I was just going, oh no, please don't pick me. I look, my experiences in research as a participant and consumer researcher, I haven't had any real negative experiences. I've got to be honest with you. I found all of my experiences to be pleasant. I felt equal and included as part of the team. I think it's really just getting the team right, bringing in the people who want to be a part of the project and who can contribute meaningfully through their lived experience. Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't have a negative experience that turned right. I'm just grateful for the experiences.
I can see that got her hand up that she might want to contribute to that question.
Thank you, Carly. I was just going to say that I think it's really important, whether you're a researcher or a consumer, that you always work with people that you like. Number one rule. And if by chance someone in the team has ruffled feathers and you're not happy, discuss it at every twist and point. I know very early on, I'm not going to say how many decades ago now, that I started working in the research field, I would always have pre-meetings about a meeting that was coming up. So I understood as a consumer what the researchers were going to be talking about. And then after the initial meeting, I would then have a follow-up call with like a mentor, another researcher from that meeting to say, hey, did you understand it? What can we do to help you further understand it? It gave me the opportunity to ask questions if I didn't feel comfortable in the research space. Not that that's ever stopped me, but it's just that I think the pre-call, the meeting, the after call really help to solidate everything that we're learning and contributing to.
And I can certainly talk tell you a bit about my experience with Thomas with co-design with that. It was really great just to have a coffee before the first co-design sessions, in which we discussed my fatigue and we could plan it better around that. So yeah. Just keeping an eye on the time. I I have 3 people with their hands up and 2 minutes to go. So yeah.
Yep, very
And Brian,
quickly.
I'll be terribly brief. My negative experience was with myself when I first got into research, stroke consumer research 7 or 8 years ago, when I first came into a group with stroke survivors who were suffering from aphasia, and it was my ignorance that sort of I said something which was totally inappropriate. And it wasn't deliberate, it was just my ignorance. And then I became aware of this word aphasia. So I rang someone and said, tell me about aphasia. So I then, it just sort of, I reversed my negative. And so now I'm totally aware of aphasia and its harmful effects. I also suffer. So that's me.
I think someone else has got
Yeah.
their hand up there, Brian.
Yes.
yeah.
Tell Brian
think
to shut up.
Brian, shut
Yes.
up.
I just wanted to add from the researcher perspective, kind of taking a step back from the actual sessions themselves. Human research ethics is a word that any researcher will know and kind of dread when planning a project. And I just want to emphasize that it adds so much time to the project. So it's definitely important, definitely justified, but the amount of planning that goes in before anyone walks through the door is unbelievable. So it's something that I think every researcher needs to recognize, that they need to build that time in. I can honestly say that the co-design has probably added a year to my PhD from doing the ethics, going through the session, and then coming on the other side of it. But if I didn't do that, I might have finished on time, but wouldn't have had a PhD worth sharing. So I think it was absolutely critical, but just want to emphasize that it's something that should be built into every project from the start. And yeah, I completely agree with your point, Brian, in terms of communication strategies. That should actually be built into the ethics application as well, of how you're going to disseminate that research. So yeah, there's lots of learnings, and as you mentioned, sometimes wording is tricky. And I'm actually now thinking back, I'm not sure if I've said understand or read and write on my ethics applications in terms of inclusion criteria. But as you mentioned, Kim, there's absolutely no reason why anyone with aphasia can't participate in upper limb research, because it takes longer for them to say words. So I'm going to make sure that my wording's spot on to make sure that everyone who can participate will be able to.
And generally,
And
you'll find that someone who has aphasia has also got the upper limb.
yes. And to finish off, Carly.
I was just clapping.
Good. Okay, I think there's a lot of follow-up conversations to be had. I believe Carly will share the recording after the session's finished. Yep.
Absolutely. I'll email out the recording and it'll be posted up on the Stroke Trials CRE website.
Great. And we're free to share that on our socials, LinkedIn.
Share far and wide.
Great, thanks. Thank you all for your wonderful contributions today.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you. It's been a pleasure.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, Brooke.
everyone.
Bye,
Thank
Carly.
you.
I'm going tomorrow.
All right. See you, team.